She climbed the stairs. The beep came from Laura's bedroom. She pushed the door open and saw a scene she'd never forget, no matter how much she tried. He'd shot thousands of practice rounds with Glock service pistols over the years, and now it showed. He dropped the clipboard he was holding, pulled his pistol and fired twice from the hip. I'm Andrew Rule. This is Life and Crimes. Some crimes have great resonance. We remember them for decades, mainly because not only they are terrible crimes, but they go unsolved for a long time. They become famous cold cases, and it's the mystery element that makes people wonder about them and wonder who done it, who's out there, who got away with it. Others are equally terrible crimes, but they don't capture the same attention because sometimes they are solved reasonably quickly. Today we're going to talk about one of those, and it's a case that on the bare facts is every bit as terrible, every bit as haunting as the notorious Easy Street case in Collingwood in 1977. This is a double murder of two young women from the country, like Easy Street, that happened almost 30 years later, in the year 2006. It involves two sisters from Toolamba, which is a little tiny town just south of Shepparton. The hellish hour after the killer forced his way into the sisters' home, one of the girls managed to dial 000. The call was cut off after 5 seconds, and so it wasn't answered. What happened after that is the stuff of nightmares. Laura Irwin was 21, working in her dream job in television production at Channel 10. Her sister Colleen was 23, a promising photographer who'd just been promoted at her job in a camera store. They were their parents' only children, country kids who'd come to Melbourne to make their way in the world. It's 20 years ago this month since Laura and Colleen were raped and murdered by a paroled prisoner, a violent sex offender who, it turned out, had spied on them from next door after cutting down a palm tree so he could see their bathroom window. It was clearly premeditated. It happened in the early hours of a Saturday morning, January the 28th, 2006. Colleen, the older sister, had come home from a housewarming party around 12:45am to the unit that she shared with Laura in Millers Road, Altona North. He was a big man. He was waiting for her. He attacked after she got out of her car. Colleen, barely more than half his weight, had no chance. He forced her to the door and used her keys to get inside, where Laura was asleep after spending a quiet evening at home. That was at 12:45 or thereabouts. That call to 000 was at 1:44am, an hour later. And of course, that call was cut off by someone in the murder house after 5 seconds, and so it didn't last long enough to be actually transferred to an operator who could raise the alarm. This is one of the things that must haunt the Irwin girls' parents. The girls always called home every day, sometimes several times. Their parents, Shirley and Alan Irwin, lived at Toolamba, where they'd brought the girls up most of their lives. Toolamba is on the southern edge of Shepparton. It's one of those little country towns that the locals call a small town with a big heart. The girls had gone to school in Shep, they'd played sport locally, and they'd worked in the fruit canneries to save money to get where they wanted to go. Shirley Irwin knew something was wrong when her daughters didn't call on that Saturday, and when her calls to them went unanswered. She was worried. So was her husband. So was the girl's best friend, Candace Osborne, who lived in Melbourne and had a key to their unit. Eventually, Candace went around to the sisters' unit in Millers Road and she opened the door. It was late on that Saturday, it was in the evening. Downstairs everything looked normal. Candace walked through the kitchen. She called out. No one answered. She almost left. She said later, it felt weird snooping through their house. And so she nearly left. But then she heard a faint electronic beep. She recognised it. It was Colleen's phone. It was set to beep to flag any unanswered calls and text messages. Candace was alarmed. She climbed the stairs. The beep came from Laura's bedroom. She pushed the door open and saw a scene she'd never forget, no matter how much she tried. Colleen was lying on her back, naked from the waist down. Laura was beside her. Both of them had been stabbed to death. It didn't take the police long to deduce who they were looking for. They did not make his name public for legal reasons, but the obvious suspect was the sister's neighbour, William John Watkins, whose form as a violent sex offender was chilling. Not that they knew that. They knew nothing about him. Watkins, who was 38, had been committing crime since 1985, which was almost as long as Laura had been alive. He'd been jailed in May 2000, that is 6 years earlier, for rape and aggravated burglary, and he had prior convictions for serious assault. He'd been sentenced to more than 4 years, but was released after a minimum of 2. When police identified Watkins and his prior convictions, he was officially, quote, a person of interest, but significantly, he had vanished. His employers notified the police on Monday afternoon, January the 30th, that he had not turned up for work. It wasn't until then that police got a warrant and searched Watkins' home unit next door to the murder scene. Watkins had left just after dawn on that Saturday morning, January 28. He'd withdrawn what little money he had from a nearby ATM at 6:44 a.m, exactly 6 hours after ambushing Colleen Irwin. It was late on Monday before police were confident that Watkins was probably the killer, but they did not flag his name and prior convictions to interstate police, nor make it public in media reports. That decision, or that oversight, nearly cost a brave Western Australian policeman his life. Watkins had fled in his white Toyota Lexus station wagon, a vehicle identical to a Holden Commodore in everything but badging. He had a 2-day start. No one knew which direction he'd taken. Around 9:30 Tuesday morning, January the 31st, a white Commodore station wagon, as it appeared to be, pulled into the Fortescue Roadhouse at Mardi, 110 kilometres from Karratha, in the Pilbara region of Western Australia, bordering a vast area of the north, where Victorian fugitives sometimes fled to hide, to get lost. The driver filled the car with $80 worth of petrol and then drove off northwards without paying. It was a drive-off. The roadhouse attendant called Karratha police to report the theft. Sergeant Shane Gray caught what seemed a routine job. The other on-duty officer didn't have his police belt, pistol and handcuffs with him. Rather than wait for his mate to grab his gear, Sergeant Gray headed out alone, driving south in a marked patrol car to watch for the white station wagon. He was playing the car radio, and as luck had it, his favourite song came on, American Pie by Don McLean. Just as he saw a car approaching in the distance, the song hit the last line, "This'll be the day that I die." It almost was. The approaching car was the wanted white station wagon. The policeman flashed his headlights, did a U-turn and hit the siren and lights. The wagon kept on at a steady 110 kilometres an hour for a short distance, then pulled over on a straight stretch about 15 k's from Karratha. Sergeant Gray parked well behind it and called in the car's details, only to be told there was nothing known about it or its driver, meaning that in the 18 hours that Victoria Police had known that a double murder suspect was on the run in his readily identifiable car, their interstate counterparts had not been warned. No other police outside Victoria knew anything about Watkins or his car. Assured that it was nothing but a petty petrol drive-off, Sergeant Gray walked up to the car. Just a small job. But when he saw the driver, he felt a pang of caution. The man was at least 100 kilograms and muscular and hard-looking with it. The policeman later described him as looking like a rugby player. The big man showed his driver's licence, quite willingly. He admitted he had stolen the petrol because he had no money. In fact, he said he'd done it earlier in the same trip, which he had. Sergeant Gray went back to the police car and called in the details. The name and date of birth of the driver, William John Watkins, born 24th of April 1967. The Karratha officers checked the name inquiry system on the police computer and told the sergeant that Watkins wasn't on the West Australian database. No problems. Sergeant Gray replied that he was going to try and arrest the bloke, but he said he's a big guy, so can you send out a secure vehicle to take him back in? He meant, a paddy wagon or a divvy van, whatever. He didn't feel like putting him in a sedan with himself. A police van was sent, but no one had any clue they could be dealing with a double murderer on the run, probably the most desperate man in Australia that month. The sergeant told Watkins he'd have to come to the police station in Karratha. The big man stayed dead calm and was strikingly cooperative. He locked his car and he walked towards the police car. Sergeant Gray did the right thing and he stayed towards the middle of the road to keep a little bit of distance between him and the offender. But it wasn't enough. Suddenly, Sergeant Gray saw a white flash, as he described it later, and a vicious blow hit him on the left side of the head. It was the worst punch he'd ever copped in a long career. The policeman went to the ground on all fours, while Watkins rained punches on him and kneed him. Twice Watkins told him, "You're a dead c***," with chilling calm. It was a promise, not bluster. The policeman was scared for his life, and he knew that his life was in danger, that any second now he'd be dead. But the muscle memory from his training kicked in. He said later that he'd shot thousands of practice rounds with Glock service pistols over the years, and now it showed. He dropped the clipboard he was holding, pulled his pistol and fired twice from the hip as Watkins closed in for the kill. The first shot hit the big man in the torso. In fact, it went up through his lungs and it was a fatal shot. He grunted and sprawled sideways. The second shot went wide. William Watkins, rapist and murderer, had picked the wrong man, a proficient shot under pressure. It wasn't Shane Gray's day to die, but he had come terrifyingly close. Watkins had hit him so hard that his nose had virtually disappeared and was pushed up under one of his cheekbones. His teeth were cracked and his ribs battered. It was as if he'd been run over. Sergeant Gray would later tell a hushed coroner's court, "He was going to kill me. Simple as that. He had the ability and the means and everything to take me out. I was gone. I was going back to the ground. As soon as I was on that ground, I was gone. He could have punched me one more time to the head, and I would have no doubt he would have taken my firearm, finished me off, and then driven into the sunset. Instead, Watkins had a .40 caliber bullet in his vital organs. He collapsed a few steps away. He was dead by the time the police van arrived minutes later. By then, Shane Gray was also sprawled on the road, injured and totally shattered by his brush with death. The quiet policeman was in hospital before he found out the truth about the monster who tried to kill him. By then, 4,500 kilometres away in Toolamba, Shirley and Alan Irwin were facing the first terrible week of the rest of their lives. When a detective called late to say they got him, it meant a lot. William Watkins' death could never bring their girls home, but it built a bond between two families living a continent apart. Shane Gray, the injured policeman, and his wife, and the grieving parents became firm friends, glued together by terrible events and fear and grief. Shirley Irwin struggled later to describe how close she felt to the brave and humble man who'd shot the beast who killed her girls. Shane doesn't want to be called a hero, she said, but he did Colleen and Laura justice, and he did the world a favour. Thanks for listening. Life and Crimes is a Sunday Herald Sun production for True Crime Australia. Our producer is Jonty Burton. For my columns, features and more, go to heraldsun.com.au/Andrew Rule, one word. For advertising inquiries, go to newspodcastssold@news.com.au. That is all one word, newspodcastssold. And if you want further information about this episode, links are in the description.